The British government just made a move that nobody saw coming. While 3 million citizens are demanding a fresh election, Keir Starmer has dropped a bombshell that's left the entire nation stunned. What's happening right now in Westminster could change everything you thought you knew about British democracy. This isn't just another political story. This is the moment that could define the future of the United Kingdom. And what Starmer just did has sparked outrage across every corner of the country. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will shock you to your core. Britain is in absolute chaos right now, and the timing couldn't be more suspicious. Just when the pressure was mounting to unbearable levels, just when millions of voters were making their voices heard through the largest petition that this country has seen in years, Keir Starmer pulled off a political manoeuvre that nobody anticipated. 3 million signatures demanding a general election. Think about that number for a second. 3 million British citizens fed up with broken promises and failed policies, united in their demand for change. This isn't some fringe movement or a handful of disgruntled voters. This is a massive wave of public dissent that the government simply cannot ignore. But here's where things get really interesting. Instead of addressing these concerns head on, instead of engaging with the millions who feel betrayed and abandoned, Starmer chose a completely different path. And trust me, what he chose to do is causing shockwaves throughout the entire political establishment. The petition itself tells a story of deep frustration. It started gaining momentum weeks ago, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms and community groups. People from all walks of life from every region of the UK adding their names to a document that essentially declares no confidence in the current government. The speed at which it grew was unprecedented. Political analysts were stunned. Media outlets couldn't keep up with the numbers. And everyday citizens felt, perhaps for the first time in years, that their collective voice actually mattered. The petition wasn't just about one policy failure or one broken promise. It was about everything. The economy that keeps getting worse despite all the reassurances, the healthcare system that's barely holding together, the cost of living crisis that's crushing ordinary families, the immigration policies that satisfy nobody, the energy bills that keep climbing, the public services that keep declining. People have had enough, and they made that crystal clear. But Starmer, the man who promised transparency and accountability, the man who campaigned on being different from his predecessors, chose this exact moment to blindside everyone. Political insiders are calling it a calculated gamble. Critics are calling it a desperate attempt to cling to power. Supporters are scrambling to defend it. But here's what nobody can deny. The timing is absolutely extraordinary. When you're facing the largest petition for a general election in modern history, when your approval ratings are plummeting, when your own party members are starting to question your leadership, what do? You'd think addressing the concerns directly would be the obvious choice. You'd think reaching out to those 3 million people and explaining your position would be the democratic thing to do, but that's not what happened. Instead, Starmer made an announcement that completely changed the conversation. He didn't call for a general election. He didn't promise to address the petition signers' concerns. He didn't even acknowledge the scale of public dissatisfaction in any meaningful way. What he did was far more controversial, far more divisive, and far more likely to inflame an already tense situation. The government is pushing forward with a series of policy changes that seem specifically designed to appeal to a narrow base, while ignoring the broader concerns of those 3 million petition signers. It's a high-stakes political gamble that could either shore up his remaining support or completely destroy what little credibility he has left. Political commentators are divided. Some see it as a brilliant distraction technique, a way to shift the narrative away from the embarrassing petition numbers. Others view it as political suicide, a tone-deaf response that will only fuel more anger and more demands for his resignation. The opposition parties are having a field day. They're pointing to the petition as clear evidence that Starmer has lost the mandate to govern. They're demanding that Parliament be recalled to debate the issue. They're calling for votes of no confidence. They're mobilising their supporters to add even more pressure. The political temperature in Westminster is reaching boiling point, and everyone knows something has got to give. But here's what makes this situation even more complicated. The petition, while massive, doesn't legally force anything to happen. The UK parliamentary system doesn't have provisions for citizen-initiated recall elections based on petition numbers alone. The government knows this. Starmer knows this. And that's exactly why he feels emboldened to make his controversial move right now. He's betting that he can weather this storm, that public attention will eventually move on to something else, that his base will stick with him through the controversy. But the people who signed that petition aren't going away. They're organising, they're planning protests, they're coordinating pressure campaigns, they're reaching out to their MPs directly. They're using every democratic tool available to make their voices heard. Social media is absolutely exploding with anger and frustration. Hashtags demanding Starmer's resignation are trending constantly. Videos criticising the government's response are going viral. Ordinary citizens are recording passionate pleas explaining why they signed the petition and why they feel betrayed. The energy behind this movement is real, it's powerful, and it's not showing any signs of diminishing. If anything, Starmer's response has only made people more determined to see change happen. The economic context makes everything worse. Britain is struggling. Real wages are down. Inflation is eating away at savings. Businesses are closing. Young people can't afford homes. Pensioners are choosing between heating and eating. The promised post-Brexit prosperity never materialised. The pandemic recovery has been painfully slow. And now people are being told they just need to be patient, that things will get better eventually, that the government has a plan. But patience has run out. The 3 million signatures represent 3 million people who've stopped believing in promises and started demanding accountability. They want action, they want change, and they want it now. The political fallout from Starmer's decision is spreading like wildfire across every level of British society, and what's emerging is a picture of a nation deeply divided and increasingly frustrated with its leadership. Parliamentary insiders are reporting that even within the Labour Party itself, there's growing unease about how this situation is being handled. Backbenchers are receiving thousands of emails and calls from constituents who feel completely ignored. Local party meetings are becoming heated debates about whether the leadership has lost touch with ordinary voters. Some MPs are quietly distancing themselves from Starmer's position, carefully crafting statements that acknowledge the concerns of petition signers without directly criticising their party leader. It's a delicate dance that reveals just how precarious that the political situation has become. The Conservative opposition, still reeling from their own electoral defeats and internal chaos, suddenly finds itself with ammunition it never expected. They're hammering home the message that Labour promised change but delivered more of the same dysfunction. They're highlighting every policy failure, every broken promise, every instance where the government's actions contradicted its words. The Liberal Democrats and other smaller parties are also seizing the moment, positioning themselves as the true voice of democratic accountability. What makes this crisis particularly explosive is that it's not just about politics anymore. It's become a cultural flashpoint that's exposing deeper fractures in British society. The 3 million petition signers represent a cross-section of the population that defies easy categorisation. They're not all from one political tribe or one demographic group. They're young and old, urban and rural, traditional Labour voters and lifelong Conservatives, people who've never engaged politically before, and activists who've been campaigning for decades. This diversity makes the movement much harder for the government to dismiss or discredit. They can't paint it as just disgruntled opponents or conspiracy theorists. These are ordinary citizens who've reached a breaking point. The media coverage has been relentless, with newspapers across the political spectrum dedicating front pages to the unfolding drama. Broadcast news programmes are running special segments analysing every aspect of the petition and the government's response. Social media platforms have become battlegrounds where supporters and critics clash constantly, with misinformation and genuine concerns mixing together in a chaotic swirl of public discourse. Behind the scenes, government strategists are working overtime to contain the damage and craft a response that might salvage the situation. They're conducting focus groups, analysing polling data, and gaming out different scenarios for how this could play out. Some are advocating for a more conciliatory approach, suggesting Starmer should meet with petition organisers and at least create the appearance of listening. Others are pushing for a more confrontational stance, arguing that showing weakness now would only embolden critics and lead to more demands. The internal debates are reportedly intense, with raised voices and frayed tempers becoming common in strategy meetings. Meanwhile, the civil service is caught in an uncomfortable position, trying to maintain its political neutrality while implementing policies that are clearly controversial and implementing them at a time when the government's legitimacy is being questioned by millions. Senior civil servants are reportedly concerned about the long-term implications for institutional stability if this crisis continues to escalate without resolution. The international dimension adds another layer of complexity to this already complicated situation. Foreign governments are watching closely, wondering whether Britain's political instability will affect its reliability as a partner. Trade negotiations are becoming more difficult as other countries question whether agreements made now will survive potential political changes. The value of the pound has fluctuated as markets react to the uncertainty. International media outlets are running stories about British democracy in crisis, comparing the petition movement to similar grassroots uprisings in other countries. Some are drawing parallels to the Yellow Vest movement in France or various populist movements across Europe. Britain's reputation as a stable, mature democracy is being tested in ways that make many establishment figures deeply uncomfortable. The contrast between the UK's historical image as a model of democratic governance and the current chaos is stark and embarrassing for those who still cling to notions of British exceptionalism. What's particularly striking is how this crisis is playing out differently across the different nations of the United Kingdom. In Scotland, where support for independence remains strong, the petition and Starmer's response are being used as further evidence that Westminster doesn't represent Scottish interests. Scottish National Party politicians are having a field day, arguing that this proves Scotland needs to break away from a dysfunctional UK political system. In Wales, there's frustration that Welsh concerns about economic decline and public service cuts are being drowned out by the broader Westminster drama. Northern Ireland, already dealing with its own complex political situation and the ongoing challenges of post-Brexit arrangements, finds itself largely sidelined in this debate, despite the issues affecting people there just as much. The petition numbers from each nation tell their own story, with regional variations revealing different levels of dissatisfaction and different priorities. England's regions show particularly stark divides, with northern areas and coastal towns contributing disproportionately high numbers of signatures compared to more prosperous southern regions. The grassroots organisation behind the petition has evolved into something far more substantial than anyone initially anticipated, transforming from a simple online campaign into a genuine political movement with structure, strategy and serious momentum. Community organisers across the country are holding regular meetings in town halls, community centres and even private homes, coordinating their efforts to maintain pressure on the government and build towards something bigger. These aren't professional political operatives or career activists. They're teachers and nurses, small business owners and pensioners, IT workers and factory employees who've decided they can't sit on the sidelines anymore. The movement has developed its own communication networks using encrypted messaging apps and social media groups to share information, coordinate actions and support each other when they face pushback. Some groups are organising peaceful protests outside constituency offices, presenting MPs with printed copies of the petition signatures from their areas and demanding face-to-face meetings to discuss concerns. Others are focusing on media outreach, writing letters to newspapers, calling into radio phone-in shows and creating viral content that keeps the issue in the public eye. The creativity and dedication being displayed is remarkable, showing that when people feel genuinely threatened or betrayed by their government, they find ways to make their voices heard regardless of the obstacles. What Starmer and his advisors seem to have miscalculated is the staying power of this movement and its ability to adapt and evolve. Traditional political wisdom suggests that public outrage eventually fades, that people get tired and move on to other concerns, that governments can simply wait out controversial periods. But this situation is different because it's tapping into years of accumulated frustration rather than reacting to a single incident. People aren't angry just about one policy or one broken promise. They're angry about the entire direction the country has taken, about feeling powerless and ignored, about watching their living standards decline while being told everything is fine. The petition became a focal point for all of that accumulated anger, a way to quantify and express feelings that had been building for years. Now that those feelings have been acknowledged and validated by the sheer number of signatures, people aren't willing to let the moment pass. They've tasted what collective action feels like. They've seen that they're not alone in their frustrations, and they're determined to push for real change rather than symbolic gestures. The economic pressures facing ordinary Britons continue to worsen, providing constant fuel for the political fire. Recent statistics show household debt reaching record levels as families borrow just to cover basic expenses. Food bank usage has increased dramatically, with even working families now requiring emergency food assistance to get through the month. Energy companies are announcing another round of price increases just as winter approaches, forcing impossible choices between heating homes and feeding children. The promised economic recovery keeps being pushed further into the future, with government projections constantly being revised downward. Small businesses are closing at alarming rates, unable to cope with rising costs and reduced consumer spending. High streets across the country are filled with empty shop fronts, creating ghost town atmospheres in communities that were once vibrant commercial centres. Young people are increasingly pessimistic about their futures, seeing home ownership as an impossible dream and career advancement as a distant fantasy. The statistics and personal stories create a devastating picture of a country in decline, and every news cycle brings fresh evidence that contradicts government claims of progress and stability. Starmer's specific policy announcements, the ones he chose to make instead of addressing the petition directly, have only intensified the backlash rather than diffusing it. The measures he's proposing are being widely criticised as missing the point entirely, as focusing on peripheral issues while ignoring the core concerns that drove millions to sign the petition. Policy experts and think tanks across the political spectrum are publishing analyses showing how the proposed changes will either have minimal impact or potentially make existing problems worse. Opposition parties are dissecting every detail, highlighting contradictions between what was promised during the election campaign and what's being delivered now. Even some typically supportive media outlets are expressing scepticism, running opinion pieces questioning whether the government understands the severity of the situation it's facing. The disconnect between what people are demanding and what the government is offering couldn't be more stark. And that gap is being exploited by everyone who wants to see Starmer fail. The constitutional implications of this standoff are generating serious academic and legal debate about the nature of democratic legitimacy and government accountability. Constitutional scholars are writing lengthy articles examining whether the current system provides adequate mechanisms for citizens to express no confidence between scheduled elections. Some are arguing that the petition demonstrates a fundamental flaw in the British parliamentary system, showing that governments can effectively ignore public opinion once they've secured a majority. Others defend the existing arrangements, arguing that regular elections provide sufficient accountability and that petition-based recalls would create instability. Legal experts are being consulted about whether there are any grounds for legal challenges to the government's refusal to call an election despite the petition numbers. Parliamentary historians are digging through centuries of precedent, looking for similar situations and how they were resolved. The debate is fascinating for those interested in constitutional theory, but for ordinary citizens dealing with everyday struggles, the academic discussions feel detached from the urgent reality of their lives. They don't care about constitutional niceties. They care about their inability to pay bills, their crumbling public services, and their sense that the people governing them simply don't care about their suffering.